more more general ideas. So this is a mixture, basically, of what's going on. Can I see it? Okay, thank you. All right, so the chief question that I'm trying to investigate is whether democracy is in crisis. And as I warned you, I don't know. But I'm going to mention a lot of people who have very definite opinions about that kind of stuff, and I'll just try to swim through this amorphous sea and try to bring them down to their first principles. So, the description of democracies that you see here, I don't know how well you can see them: managed democracy, audience democracy, disaffected democracy, disfigured democracy, cosmopolitan, monetary, counter-democracy, fugitive democracy, and so on. This is the good news. The bad news is that I've managed to extrapolate 56 types of definitions of the crisis of democracy, which is also good news, because some former advisors of mine from Harvard University published an article that extrapolated 550 types of democracies in the world. So this is basically the good news that I'm presenting here. And really, the question that I'm trying to get across in this book is to see, what is this crisis of democracy? When we talk about this, what are we really talking about? Let's start from somebody from far back. Let's say, for example, Lipset. And basically he says that the crisis of democracy occurred somewhere in 1960, 1975 in the United States, where the government sort of was performing really well before the Vietnam War, and then the war came, and the Watergate crisis was just a watershed for the public confidence in the government. And so really, the confidence gap is the gap between the performance of the government before and after that crisis. So, then we have Matthew Flinders, who is a professor at Sheffield University, and he says actually the crisis of democracy has nothing to do with the elites. Really, the crisis of democracy comes from you, from the citizens, because the crisis of democracy is generated by the very high expectations that we have of the government, for no good or specific reason. And then he says that the only way to bridge that expectations gap is basically to bring down the expectations of the public and say, okay, democracy is not as flawed as we think it is. Maybe democracy has some good members of parliament, the government are actually doing a really good job. And so he thinks that in order to close the gap between the supply of representation and the demand, the public demand of representation, demand for representation, we should bring down the expectations of the government. Then comes Pippa Norris from Harvard University, who says that, who defines the democratic deficit as the difference between how much people value democracy in principle and how much they're satisfied with democracy, the way democracy is doing in their own country in practice. So it's actually the difference between the principle and the practice. And you can see a very small, relatively small deficit. It's interesting that actually the democratic deficit in Russia is smaller than the democratic deficit in Bulgaria. So, when we shift, So, when we talk about these things, I sort of try to differentiate between the people who believe in democracy and those who are very skeptical of it. And I think that this really comes down to two things. The critics of democracy think that this is a very elitist notion. They think that the general public is basically fallen victim to the political elite. Whereas the people who believe in the transformation of democracy are people who believe in the salient powers of globalization, the media, and so on. So really, this comes down to the perception of the political elites and the public. Let's think about the effects of the media, the parties, globalization, and the fiscal crisis. You may think that you live in media-saturated societies. You may think that there is a lot of information that is coming to you, that you have a lot of choice between the newspapers, the media outlets, but the critics of democracy say this is not so. Really, this is not electronic democracy. We don't live in an age of communications abundance. What happening is that you live in those echo chambers, where, for example, every day you go online and you say you read your favorite news site, Off News, Pick News, Dirbege, whatever. What they're saying is that really these sites function like echo chambers, because the only people who go there are people who expect to see certain opinions voiced on those websites. And the people who go there, who are critical of what they're going to read, they go there just to relieve their hate and basically to have fun. So there is an entertaining element, but also there is no real argument. It's not educational. So really, the whole media enterprise is being hijacked by, let's say, the infamous Persky, or here in Britain, Rupert Murdoch, who actually structured the media market in a way in which you think that you have a lot of choice, but you don't, because the choice has been made a long time ago by people very, very high up. So, because of this high media saturation and concentration of ownership, people usually go to, this is the argument, for example, in the Electronic Republic, they only go to the top 30 sites. So there is actually very little choice. 30 might seem like a lot to you, but it's not really. And the way the programs appear on Google, also you're being manipulated, the way Google works and so on. But really, the people who oppose those views are basically saying that yes, the media is very scandalous and it presents the people in a very infamous way, but really what happens is that there is this ocular moment. The ocular moment is the moment where the politicians don't really control their behavior. Because everything that reaches the public is something that is very manufactured. Their speeches are prepared in advance, and you may think that you're actually seeing their true faces, but that's not the fact. This is just a product of opinion polling and speech writing by professionals. And so the people who believe in democracy are saying that what is happening is that somehow in this process you catch those people off guard, and they will reveal their true nature. And this will be the moment that will bring you so much information. You're better off this way than not having information at all. The parties, Peter Mayer is saying, basically the middle class is disappearing. People are being very polarized. What does that do to civil society? People lose connections. They're very, very pessimistic about this, because there is the advent of the charismatic parties in Bulgaria. What does this do? For example, people like Volen Sidorov and Boyko Borisov and Saksko Burgotsky and recently Barekov, undeniably are people who are very charismatic. But they don't have an ideology. Their ideology is basically based on this, on their personality, the so-called charismatic leader, if we follow Weber. And so what happens is that people are not united by the social privileges, the social class. We live in a post-ideological age. And so this sort of disperses the electorate. People are losing connection because there aren't any big fundamental ways in which publics are rallied up. But actually the people who believe in the transformation, not in the crisis of democracy, say that the demise of the parties is not so bad, because it basically, by deterioration of the parties, releases some certain opportunities for people to reconnect together. Now, you might think that the new societies that are being created, non-political societies, let's say, for example, the Protestna Mreža in Bulgaria, that are not political, are an opportunity that couldn't arise in your prototypical representative democracy. But the critics of democracy say, okay, you have this movement, you have Protestna Mreža in Bulgaria, this is great. But what is really happening is that these people, they say the contribution of these people, non-political movements to, let's say, Bulgarian political life are very, very limited, because they don't want to, they're a very horizontal organization, they're not hierarchical, and they actually oppose the status quo. They don't oppose particular points within the system, they oppose the system as such. And so it's very hard for the system to rally up the troops. And also, they're saying, well, I recently organized a conference in the Center for the Study of Democracy in Bulgaria. And a lot of the people from the protest movement in Bulgaria were present there. And what I could see is basically that there was not very good communication between them. So my idea is that, yes, of course, we live in a post-party, post-political, post-representative stage, but really, are these people connected enough? And if they deny, all the leaders there don't want to be leaders, really, this is a very horizontal structure, what can their contribution be? And one more thing from just my personal observation, from watching these people who are absolutely, I think, astoundingly smart, and they're probably honest and everything, but when I, for example, watch them on certain Milencev and so on, I get the impression that they don't have the charisma that, let's say, Boyko Borisov has. And so the idea is, you have these technocrats, or you have very intelligent people who make good argument, but they're not charismatic, and you have charismatic people who may or may not make a good argument, and so the connection is, the question is, what do you lose and what do you gain in that trade-off? Globalization, one of the most important reasons why people believe that democracy is not digressing, but it is progressing, is globalization. And here, the whole idea goes back to one single question. Can you have active citizens in a stateless society, in a non-territorial society? So basically, for example, the Bulgarian diaspora here, we're sort of stateless, we're not bound to territorial units. How loose and how connected are those units, and what can they actually produce? And then the fiscal crisis. It has blown such a big blow to the ability of the people to trust the government, because the government, it seems, especially in 2008, became to produce less and less goods for them. And so people withdrew, they became apathetic, they lost trust. People who are very critical of democracy are very fearful of the people who don't want to vote, and so on. People who've lost trust in the government and its ability to deliver services for them. And I think, for people who are in the field, the idea of monetary democracy and counter-democracy here are more salient, and here manage an audience and everything. But this goes back to probably 1975, when people like Samuel Huntington from Harvard University and two others wrote the trilateral report, and they basically said there, one of the important ideas was that the intellectuals are doing such big harm to democracy, because intellectuals bring to the public these ideas, and the public starts doubting democracy, and basically the less you educate the public, and the more you limit the access of intellectuals to the public, the better off you are. So this was, in effect, a very, very elitist way of looking at things. Okay, so I come up with the idea of extra-electoral democracy, which reviewers of my book, which is under review with 2 presses, have told me that I repeat too much, but this is sort of my contribution to the field. I think so. And if you can make an argument without introducing a new notion, that would be great. But I think that's kind of necessary, because I think that in the long history of democracy, you moved from direct democracy to representation, direct democracy in the Asian polis, Greek polis, to monarchy, and then the representative democracy, as we know it, the prototypical representative democracy started moving up, and because of urbanization and commercialization, people got more economic rights, and then they were giving the right to vote, and sort of they were kept quiet. People were kept quiet because they were giving the right to vote. But at the point, you reach your maximum capacity, because almost everybody all countries have full suffrage, and then, and this is the key, I think that now we're at the crossroads, and the crossroads is that you have a lot of people who have the right to vote but don't believe in the right to vote. And so what do you do? Okay, all right, thank you very much. And so what happens is that I think there is this idea of deliberative democracy. So people like Dreisig in Houston and so on, who believe that if you get people together, you're going to bridge that polarization and fragmentation of the political will by having these people discuss some issue. So this is a very procedural way of of bridging the differences in society. This is a very procedural way to bridge the differences caused by media fragmentation, by the demise of the political parties, by globalization, and by the fiscal crisis. You basically put people together and you deliberate. But actually, how useful is that? How applicable is deliberative democracy on a larger scale? And this is the big question. So basically, I think that if you leave that avenue aside, you're going to reach a point where you live in an age of extra-electoral democracy, where basically the action is happening beyond elections. And this is a big news in terms of our perception of what democracy is, because usually when we think about democracy, we think about liberal democracy and about electoral democracy. But the idea of extra-electoral democracy is that what happens in between elections is what really matters. So basically, I collected a lot of data during my PhD to try to see what happens to media accusations, who makes media accusations leveled at the government, and who investigates them. And this is the data, and actually I had a very good experience by delegating that task to a student called Todor from Bulgarian National University, who was very modest and very hardworking and did a great job. We collected actually about 6,500 articles in total, containing accusations leveled at the government in Germany, Russia, and Bulgaria. And these are the results. What happens here is that you would say that Bulgaria is a particular case of judicialization of extra-electoral accountability. So when somebody, let's say, accuses the government in the media, or that allegation reaches the media, the most likely investigative mechanisms that will produce sanctions for the government is some sort of judicial mechanism. And then, only then come parliamentary committees, internal governmental responsibility, prosecutor general, audit chamber, and others. In Germany, electoral democracy is still alive, and the way I prove that.
Can you please invite you to come to the
Yes, I actually only have one more slide. Yeah, and actually I prove that by demonstrating the importance of parliamentary questions. If an allegation level at the government comes up in, for example, Die Welt or Süddeutsche Zeitung, then the most likely way in which you're going to make the government accountable for those accusations is by parliamentary questions, the so-called Aktuelle Stunde in their parliament. But also, very important, the effects of globalization are crucial, and that is the European Union is a big force. So I would actually, before I started doing this, I was very skeptical of people who believed in internalization of accountability and so on. Now I believe in that, just because I think that otherwise you would just have electoral democracy and you wouldn't have any competition for investigating the government. And in Russia the case is just, it's very clear that there is what I call monopolization of accountability, where the president has a monopoly over who gets punished or what. Interestingly enough, in Russia, accusations in the media are made by the media, but who owns the media? And so what happens in Russia is a vicious circus where people who control the media, or circles, oligarchic circles, who control media outlets, make some accusations, and then they're being sort of arbitered by the president. And so basically I'm saying that really the way the media opens up that field of extra electoral accountability very much depends on the preconditions, and the preconditions are being set by these four factors. And it really comes down to the way the demise of the political parties, globalization, and the media sort of affect the power of civil society to be autonomous and to act in a more concerted way. So it's a very long book, so I hope it
We only have time for 2 questions, and we'll collate them One Diane, is there another one? Okay, second.
Okay, very tricky presentation to follow, but like a lot of information. Obviously, it's a
wait till we read the book.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's it's quite amazing how concise you made it in 10 minutes. Thank you for that. And my question is actually a bit complex as well, so I'm gonna try to kind of ask it.
But short.
Yeah, I will. So I'm not entirely sure like whether you your book actually looks at that, but with media, in particular social media, right, there's sort of two camps, right? So there's one which says it enables kind of people to express their opinions and also kind of for people to share their opinions as well, and obviously in a tangible sort of case study, you have the Arab Spring and social media kind of brings people together. So in that respect, social media and media in general is kind of the positive side. And brings people together, because you mentioned that, do people actually come together through media? Or do you have kind of atoms, like, does it actually make people more individual? Yeah. And I actually watched a video recently, which was an awesome 4-minute video, like an animation. It's called The Invention of Loneliness, I think, or something like that, where basically, social media is called social media because the idea behind it is to bring people together, but the actual impact is you stay at home, and you're locked at home basically. So it's actually, what is your kind of view on this almost a paradox, right? So it's a social paradox. Social media is supposed to bring you together, and it does in some countries, but at the same time in the West, people stay at home and they're actually very lazy. Our generation especially, like, it's just incredible. Like, I get so frustrated with that. And kind of to put it into sort of perspective as well, what I was going to say.
Could we bring
yeah,
up here
sure.
and then take a second? Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you what you made of the student protests in Bulgaria, if you thought they contributed to democracy, or if they didn't, what the alternative would be. And also, what, in relation to your book topic, what did you make of the recent sort of immersion of media people into politics with Barakov and Rosenberg going into, or hoping to go into government with their political ambitions?
Thank you very much for these thoughtful questions. Well, I really try not to have an opinion until I have data, and currently we are collecting data with a colleague of mine from Bulgaria about who actually goes to the Facebook pages of the so-called leaders of the protest movement. And I can tell you that they might have a lot of followers on Facebook, but the people who comment there and the people who actually read the posts, really they've made their minds. So basically you're preaching to the converted. And actually we want to compare the effect that the leaders of those protest movements think that they have through the Facebook pages and the actual effect that they have. I think that these people really grossly overestimate the importance of social media, because this is a very limited tool for influencing the public in general. I think they need to work on their public skills. I think they make very frequent opinions, but I don't think that they're forceful enough. Apparently they believe in the force of argument, but this is not what the citizen wants. The citizen wants entertainment. The citizen wants somebody like George Bush. I have a colleague who was interviewing me from the Bulgarian National Radio, and in a conversation afterwards she told me that, I'm not an expert on this, I'm not a linguist actually, but they told me that the speaking style of Boyko Borisov apparently is absolutely brilliant, because apparently when they read the typescripts of his interviews and public speeches, every word is right. And so these are people who are, I just basically retell her opinion. I don't know whether this is the case, but it seems that this is what gets people's attention, people who are really wizards with words. So Facebook, I'm skeptical, but we're working on collecting the data, which is very time consuming.
It's not linked with bringing the expectation of the
Can I
society
please
down.
ask you to not bring in further comments, because we're a bit out of time, but there will be plenty of time after after the last panel to actually already have a discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, and likewise, I think that the student protest in Bulgaria is just a part of a larger framework, because what happens in Bulgaria, and it happened a little bit earlier than that in Turkey, and there was a wave of protests in Greece, and I think co-joined with that in Romania a little bit, and now look what's going on in Ukraine. So I think that really, and before that the Arab Spring, I think the word, we are just basically following a trend. We think we might be inventing a trend, but we are really the victim of a trend of this extra-electoral democracy where people are fighting not to be drowned in apathy, and they're fighting for their autonomous voice in the post-representational stage. I was also very stunned by the admission of Rosen Petrov on TV, on live, by saying that he's entering politics. I think that really the ethical and journalistic standards there, there is a threshold to that. But if I have to actually use the framework from my book, I would say that every time that there is a synergy between the political, economic, and media elites, it is a very, very bad thing for democracy. Because what happens when you have different group of elites, you have elite struggle. And when they can't really settle their differences, let's say in parliament, or let's say when political actor and economic actor are fighting, then they sooner or later are going to take the quarrel in public, and we're going to arbitrate it. But if they're the same one and the same thing, this is very, very, very bad thing for democracy.
Please join me in thanking our panelists for very interesting presentations. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but as I said, after the end of the last panel, there will be plenty of time to engage them further, and I'm sure that there will be many more questions. So thank you very much to our panelists for